Hi everyone, welcome to my channel. In today's video, I am super excited to share with all of you my first impressions of the Sonia G Hinoki Set. So these beautiful brushes are Sonia G's latest release with Hinoki wood handles, and the brushes are inspired by cranes. So if you're interested in learning more about these brushes, then just stick around. So first off, I have to admit, I actually was originally going to pass on this collection. I feel like there wasn't a whole lot of hype about this collection, and this is a limited edition release, and these two relatively small brushes ring in at $120. And so for me, when it comes to limited edition releases, I usually don't prioritize them because if I fall in love with them and show them a lot on my channel, it's not like you guys can actually get the products after they sell out. And also $120 is a lot. I typically expect for a brush of this size maybe to pay like $30 to $40, and for a brush like this maybe more of the $40 to at most maybe $50 range. So these guys are pretty pricey. But that said, after I read Sonia G's blog post about them, I just fell in love with her descriptions and really wanted to add these to my collection. So for me, what really closed the deal was some of the comparisons that she did with her existing brush collection. So in particular, for this larger brush that has a slight fan shape to it, she compared this to her Niji Pro brush. And if you guys have been watching my channel recently, you know that I've been absolutely obsessed with this brush over here. Basically, this brush has really revolutionized my bronzer game. I'm someone who's always struggled to get a really nice even blend of bronzer on my cheeks. My cheeks are where I tend to get a lot of acne and texture, and so it's really hard for me to get a really nice even blend, but I feel like this brush has been really perfect for helping me out with that. It's dense enough that it lays down really nice even layers of bronzer. You can see just how smooth that edge is. But it's also fluffy enough that it can be used to really blend out any harsh edges. And so for me with this brush, I find I can just stamp product in very easily all around my face, and it just leaves a really nice airbrushed finish. The only slight thing though that I'm not 100% in love with this brush is my face is a little bit on the smaller side, and so I find with this brush I do have to be a little bit careful with my placement because basically it can distribute product across my entire cheekbone area with just one pounce. And so when I saw that this guy is very similar to the Niji Pro but much smaller, I was really stoked because this is exactly what I've been looking for. Having both of these together, I will say that the Niji Pro is definitely more dense in comparison to this Hinoki Set brush. So it's definitely not just a smaller version of this brush, but as you can see here, they do have a similar shape in cross section. And here's how they look from the top. So I'm really excited to compare these two in today's video to see which one is better at bronzer application. For the smaller Hinoki brush, the comparison that really sold me was with Sonia G's detail brush. This is from her Lotus collection. And so you can see that they have somewhat similar shapes. From this angle, they're relatively similar size and shape. Now the Hinoki brush is a bit thicker and rounder in comparison to the Detail Pro, which has a little bit more of a triangular shape. But on the whole, they definitely have quite a bit of similarity. And for me, this detail brush is one of my other favorites from Sonia G. So I wouldn't say this is my absolute favorite brush for any particular task, but I really love the multifunctional nature of this brush. Basically, you can do your entire cheek with this one little brush. So it's small enough to really get into the hollows of your cheeks for contour and also for highlight. But it's still fluffy enough that you can easily blend out blush and bronzer as well. And so I find whenever I use this, I can get a really nice cheek look using just this one brush. And also because it's relatively small, if you have small pan sizes, you can really get in there with this brush. Whereas for example with the Niji Pro, of course, this can only be used with pretty large bronzers. And so this is also one of my favorite Sonia G brushes, so I was really excited that this guy is quite similar to it. So it'll be really interesting in today's demo as well to compare these two side by side. In addition to the fact that these two brushes are quite similar to two of my other favorite brushes, I also was really excited about these because of the design. So as I mentioned at the top, these are inspired by cranes, and so you can see this really beautiful crane design on the handles. In Sonia G's blog post, she also described how the shape of the ferrule is inspired by the shape of crane's wings. So you can see that really beautiful subtle curve here on the ferrule. And so that really excited me as well because I love cranes. I love how beautiful this design is and just how carefully thought out every component of it is. Aesthetically speaking, I really like the contrast between the black ferrules and the white bristles, and then this very light wood for the handle. I also really love Hinoki wood, so this is a wood that's very commonly used in Japanese onsens, and I am a huge fan of hot springs and bathhouses in Japanese cultures. So Hinoki wood is a very fragrant wood that's often used in the tubs for spas in order to give more of an aromatherapy element to the experience. Of course, with these wood handles, because they are coated and because they are quite small, you can't actually smell any of that Hinoki wood scent, but I still like knowing that these are Hinoki wood. And these brushes are quite unique among Sonia G's collection in that you can see the natural grain of the wood. Finally, before we get into this demo, I wanted to briefly address packaging. So typically when you buy brushes from Beautylish, they just come in a plastic sleeve and there's no further packaging. So given that these are $120, you do expect a little bit more of a luxury experience. And so I was pleased to see that they did go up one step for this collection. So there still isn't any case or bag. Sonia G did say that she wanted all of the price of the brushes to go directly into the brush's quality rather than any packaging. But that said, they do package this in this very nice crane paper. Hopefully you guys can see this since it's white. It might be a little bit tricky to see the design, but it comes very nicely wrapped and packaged in this white tissue paper with this little black and white string tied around it. And then you have a lot of black paper to cushion the brushes, and around all of that, basically filling the whole box, is this paper with the crane design. So I thought I'd mention that because I did the unboxing already so that I could wash these brushes and use them today, but I did really like the overall unboxing experience. So without further ado, let's get into today's demo. So I already have foundation, concealer, eye makeup, brows, and lips done. I'll link in the description box all the products that I have on my face today. So with these two brushes, I'll do demos with all of my face and cheek products. And also at the end of this video, I'll do a lot of comparisons with the rest of my Fude collection. So let's start with this small Hinoki brush and some under eye setting powder. So I'm gonna go in first with my new Saie setting powder and just take a light layer of that on this brush, tap it off lightly, and then sweep this under the eyes. Ooh, okay, I really like how the shape and size of this is very perfect for that under eye area. You can really just kind of get in and do some targeted setting right in that area. On the other side of my face, I'm going to go in with this detail brush from Sonia G and sweep that on this side. Okay, yeah, this is also pretty good for that. I would say that the detail brush maybe doesn't quite get into that crease as nicely as the Hinoki brush does, but they're both pretty good for this job. For all over the face, I'm going to go in with the larger Hinoki brush and use this to just sweep, whew, cloud of powder. Okay, and just use this to sweep powder all over the rest of my face. Okay, I think that was actually pretty quick and easy. Even though this is smaller than a lot of my other powder brushes, I feel like it is distributing powder quite easily. Do you think I maybe picked up a little bit too much though, because there's a bit of a cloud of powder in the air? But this is very nice for just stamping on some powder all over the face. On the other side, I'm going to go in with my Niji Pro brush into that same Saie powder, and also similarly just kind of stamp the powder on. Because this brush is larger, it definitely makes shorter work of this process, but it's a little bit less precise in getting the powder in the center of your face. So there we go, both sides are powdered down, and I would say that in terms of using this for face powder, I do like this smaller brush slightly more than the Niji Pro. It's a little bit rounder, and so I typically prefer a round brush when it comes to powder, but both of these work really well for powdering the face. So now the use case I was most interested in, which is bronzer. So I have here my Victoria Beckham matte bronzing brick in the shade 3. So let me first start with the Hinoki brush and just kind of dab some on, maybe tap it off a little bit, and then just stamp that in. Okay, wow. Okay, that did pick up quite a lot. Ooh. All right, I was not expecting it to pick up so much product. Let's try blending that out. So it blended that out pretty easily. Let me pick up a little bit more just for the rest of my face. But I am quite surprised just how much product this brush picks up, because usually I do prefer to pick up my bronzer in more sheer light layers, whereas I feel like this is picking up a decent amount of product with every tap. And when I tap it in, I am seeing most of the product kind of gather in just one place. So I don't know if there's a way for me to spread it out a little bit more. And I'm trying to be very soft when I tap this off, because I know Sonia G's brushes are quite delicate. But let's see if I can more gradually build this up. There's also always an element of user error when you're using a new brush, because you don't quite know how the brush behaves. I will say this brush is extremely soft and comfortable on the skin, which is quite nice. All right, so there we go. I think now it's starting to look a little bit better. I think that first tap in was just a little bit too aggressive on my part. I was expecting this brush to pick up a lot less product than it actually did. So I will say, if you're using this with a pigmented bronzer, you probably do want to be a little bit careful with the pickup. But on the whole, it looks really nice. I think it blended things out very nicely, and it built up the product very well. So quite pleased upon first impression. And to more directly compare this, I'm going to now take my Niji Pro brush and use this on the other side of my face. I will caveat this by saying that the two sides of my face are quite different, and I think this is the side that tends to look better with bronzer and contour, so if you're seeing a little bit of patchiness here, please disregard that. But there we go. Okay, I will say the Niji Pro is definitely easier in my book for applying a very sheer, even layer of bronzer. There's just something about the density of the brush, and also maybe the size and shape. Because it's bigger, it has more of that flat top versus the more domed top of the Hinoki brush. So I feel like this just really seamlessly stamps on that bronzer and contour. And also, I think you could see that because this was so much bigger, it did make the whole process a lot faster. So on the whole, I am a little bit disappointed. I would say that this is less of a mini Niji Pro than I thought. This is more of kind of a hybrid, I would say, between the Niji Pro and more of a normal powder brush. So for example, pulling out my Rephr number 5 brush, you can see there's also some similarities between these two. So I would say for me, this is kind of a cross between these two brushes. So on the one hand, when it comes to doing all over powder, I did like this a little bit more than the Niji, just because of its more cotton ball shape, which is more similar to the Rephr number 5 brush. But when it comes to that really even layer of bronzer contour, the Niji Pro is definitely still my favorite for that. To be clear, I don't think this is bad for bronzer. If anything, this might now be my second favorite brush for bronzer and contour. But using it right after using the Niji Pro did make it clear to me that this is still definitely my favorite bronzer contour brush. So moving right along, let's go into some blush. So I have here my Pat McGrath Desert Orchid blush, which is one of my favorite blushes. So I'm gonna go in now with the Hinoki brush, and on this side of my face, whoa, okay. Again, I feel like every time I use this brush, I'm very surprised with just how much product it picks up. So let me actually wipe some of this off on a tissue. Interesting. Okay, let's tap that in now. So when you're using this brush, definitely just tap into the product at first. Don't really sweep it around. So for me, when I use these Pat McGrath blushes, because they are pretty hard pressed, I do often swirl a little bit, but I think with this brush, you really don't need to swirl. Just tap and then put it directly on your face. Still really beautiful application, but just a little bit more pickup than I was expecting. So on the other side of my face, I'm gonna go in with this Rephr number 5 brush since we're doing that comparison, and just tap that on. So the Rephr number 5 is definitely less soft than the Hinoki brush. In general, Rephr is a little bit less soft than Sonia G in terms of bristles. So this guy does feel a tad bit prickly, but still very beautiful blush application. And I do think this one picked up slightly less than the Hinoki one, so I was able to tap in a few times versus just once on this side. Finally, let's do some highlighter. So I have here my Pat McGrath Divine Rose highlight. And so now I'm gonna go in with the smaller Hinoki brush, since I think this will be a perfect brush for highlighter. So yeah, okay, that's really nice. And this is so soft. Transitioning from the Rephr on this side to this guy over here, it's so soft and silky on the skin. It really just hugs the skin. And you can see that gorgeous highlight that it laid down. So I do really like this as a highlighter brush. And now on the other side, I'm gonna go in with the Sonia G detail brush. Also super soft brush. And yeah, also very good at that use case. So before we get into my overall thoughts and review about the Hinoki set, let's do a few more brush comparisons with my Fude collection. So here we have the larger Hinoki brush next to the Sonia G base brush from her Lotus set. So even though these have a somewhat similar shape this direction, they actually are very different in this direction. This is a much more fluffy brush, whereas this is very, very dense. And you can see that as well in the cross section. So this is much more of a foundation and cream bronzer brush. Also, just for size comparison, I have here the Rephr number 20 brush. So they are quite similar in size this direction, but of course the fan brush is very, very thin and wispy, whereas this is a much more chunky powder brush. And here I have the Rephr number 19 brush, which is more similar in shape to the small Hinoki brush and a similar height to the larger Hinoki brush. And here is the Rephr number 4 brush. The smaller Hinoki brush is a little bit more like a finger in terms of the shape and size. And then of course the shape of the larger Hinoki brush is quite different. And then here we have the Rephr number 18 brush, more similar to the smaller Hinoki brush, but with more of a symmetrical tapered tip. And here we have the Designer Pro from Sonia G, similar size to the smaller Hinoki brush, but very different shape. Here's the Cheek Pro from Sonia G. Similar shape actually to the larger Hinoki brush, but much smaller. And then finally, here's the Wayne Goss Medium brush from his Artist Collection. Similar size to the smaller Hinoki brush, but much more pointy tip and also much more wispy bristles. So with those brush comparisons out of the way, let's get into my overall initial impression and review of these brushes. So first off, in terms of the original comparisons that drew me in, I would say the smaller Hinoki brush compares very well to the detail brush from Sonia G's Lotus set. So I like this a little bit better than the detail brush when it comes to under eye powder. I think the shape of this really is good for kind of getting in there and really setting that under eye area in a very even, targeted way. I think this is also really, really nice for highlighter. My guess is that this brush will become one of my favorites for those two use cases. Of course, this is less versatile than the detail brush in that I don't really think this would be the best, for example, with contour or blush, just because it is a little bit more targeted. I don't know, I'll have to play around with this brush and maybe try it for those purposes, but at the moment I'm really thinking of this as an under eye setting powder and highlighter brush. For the larger Hinoki brush, I will say there's been a little bit of a learning curve for me in this first application. Basically, this brush picks up way more product than I anticipated. That was true for the setting powder, for the bronzer, and for the blush. Even though I was using this alongside other brushes where I was using very similar techniques, this one just picks up a lot more than anticipated. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing, but it was surprising to me in that I was anticipating this to be more similar to my Niji Pro, which really picks up sheer buildable layers. This one really picks up a lot and then you kind of blend it out. So in terms of today's use cases, I thought it did a pretty good job with overall setting powder. I do like the more fluffy round shape of it for that. It did less well than the Niji Pro on bronzer and contour, so I wouldn't think of this as a mini version of that. For blush, it did fine, but it just picked up a lot of product. And don't get me wrong, in terms of this brush, I would say that it ranks very high in my collection. It's way softer and more comfortable on the skin than any of my Rephr brushes. And even though it picked up a lot more product than I was anticipating, it also did a really good job of blending out the product without any harsh edges. And so I still think this brush is really nice, but it's just not quite at the extremely high expectations I had based on how much I loved the Niji Pro. So my overall verdict for this brush set is, I would say this is worth picking up if you are a brush collector, if you really love the aesthetic of these brushes, and if you want really soft, very comfortable on the skin brushes that are quite versatile. That said, I do hope someday she might re-release these separately, because for me, I think this smaller brush is really a top performer, whereas this bigger brush is nice, but I'm still kind of trying to figure out the best place to slot it into my routine. I think also if you are primarily just looking for brushes to do this sort of task, definitely there are other brushes in Sonia G's collection that you could pick up that would do similar things. So buying these two together at $120 is not necessarily the best value if you're just looking at the use cases for the brushes. To me, the value of these brushes really comes with their aesthetics, which for me is fine. I really love how these look and I really love collecting Sonia G brushes, but I did want to just provide that caveat in case you're not blown away by the design. So that's it for today's video. If you guys like this video, please give it a thumbs up, and if you haven't already, please subscribe to my channel. I would love to hear in the comments down below if you guys have a favorite Fude brush or Fude brand, because I love buying Fude makeup brushes and my collection is constantly expanding. So definitely let me know what your favorites are, and also if there's other Fude related content that you would like to see on my channel. Thank you all so much for joining me today, and I'll catch you next time. Bye!